The snow came down in restless sheets that night, a white curtain swallowing the city whole. Streetlights flickered like dying candles above the icy streets, casting long shadows that stretched and broke across the pavement. Wind screamed between the rows of darkened shops, carrying bits of paper, dead leaves, and forgotten prayers. In that storm, a girl in a red coat rode against the wind. Her name was Nora Murphy, 17, skin glistening with melted snow, curls tucked beneath a knit cap too thin for the cold. Her bicycle wheels cut lines into the slush, squeaking with every rotation. She leaned forward, breath sharp in her chest, a delivery bag strapped to her shoulders and a single thought looping in her mind: don't stop. Not tonight. The cold stung her cheeks raw, but it wasn't the kind of pain that broke her, it was the kind she'd learned to live with. Hunger. Exhaustion. The small humiliations of being poor in a world that didn't slow down for anyone. Her phone buzzed again, her boss. Manager, don't be late again, Nora. Last warning. She gritted her teeth, pedaling harder. Yeah, she muttered, voice lost to the wind. Last warning since forever. Ahead, the bridge lights shimmered through falling snow. The roads were empty, except for the sound of her chain groaning under the weight of everything she carried: food, responsibility, and the kind of worry that grew heavier the longer you ignored it. She whispered under her breath, half a prayer, half a promise. One more stop. Just one more. Then I can go home. Home wasn't much. Just a single room she shared with her mother, whose lungs rattled every night from the cold, and her little brother who dreamed of birthday cakes they couldn't afford. Nora worked 2 jobs, one delivering food, the other mopping floors at a diner, just to keep the lights on. But tonight, she was late. And one more late delivery meant losing it all. The wind off the river howled louder as she turned the corner near Edison Avenue. Her front tire skidded slightly, and she caught herself with a curse. That's when she saw him. An old man stood alone at the crosswalk. His hair was white, dusted with snow like frost on winter glass. He wore a long black coat and thick gloves, but his hands trembled as he gripped a wooden cane. His face was turned toward the street, and beneath the dark lenses of his glasses, his expression was lost, like someone trying to remember a place that no longer existed. The snow gathered at his shoes, melting into the cracks of the pavement. Cars hissed by, splattering slush onto his coat. Please, his voice cracked through the wind. Someone help me cross. Nora slowed her bike, tires crunching against the curb. For a moment, she thought maybe someone else would stop. A man in a business suit passed by, head down, earbuds in. A woman carrying shopping bags glanced, then looked away. No one moved. The old man stood there, whispering again, please, anyone. Nora felt her throat tighten. Her eyes dropped to her phone. 7:41 p.m. Her delivery was due at 7:45. She had 4 minutes. 4 minutes between keeping her job or losing her home. Her hand gripped the handlebars so tightly her knuckles turned white. Not tonight, she muttered. Please, not tonight. She turned the bike, pedaling forward. 2 revolutions of the wheel. 3. And then she stopped. Her mother's voice floated through the storm, soft but certain, the kind of memory that refused to fade. If you ever see someone lost, baby, you stop. Doesn't matter who they are, you stop. Nora's breath hitched. The wind pressed cold against her back, urging her to move on, but her heart felt heavier than her delivery bag. She turned her head. The old man was still there, trembling alone, the world walking past him as if he were invisible. Something inside her broke. Damn it, she whispered, spinning the handlebars around. Her tires slipped slightly on the ice as she coasted back toward him. When she stopped in front of him, she called out gently, Sir? You all right? The old man flinched at her voice. Slowly, his head turned toward her. His eyes, hidden behind the glasses, searched for her tone rather than her face. I think I'm lost, he said, voice trembling. My driver, he was supposed to meet me here. Nora glanced around. The bus depot was deserted now, its signs glowing faintly through the snow. The storm had swallowed the city in silence. Well, she said, forcing a small smile, looks like you're stuck with me instead. He tilted his head. You don't have to. Someone will come. She looked down the empty street. Not tonight, sir. Nobody's coming. She climbed off her bike and stood beside him. The wind whipped at her red coat, tugging at her scarf. His cane tapped nervously against the ground. "Can I help you get somewhere?" she asked. He hesitated, then whispered, "I live near the hills. Willow End, I think." Her stomach dropped. That was miles away. She glanced at her phone again. 7:45. Too late. The order was missed. Her paycheck, gone. Her rent, gone. But when she looked back at him, shaking and small against the storm, she couldn't make herself care. "All right," she said, her voice steady. "Let's figure this out." She wheeled her bike closer, brushing snow off the small rear carrier. "It's not exactly a limo," she said, half smiling, "but it's got good mileage." He chuckled softly. "You can't mean to." "Yup. I mean exactly that. Now, can you sit here if I go slow? I don't want to be trouble." "Too late," Nora said with a faint grin. "Trouble's kind of my thing." The man's lips twitched, the ghost of a smile. It was the first warmth she'd seen all night. She helped him ease onto the small rack, his cane tucked under his arm. His breath came out in shallow, shivering bursts. The scarf around his neck hung loose and useless, so Nora untied her own, a faded red wool scarf she'd owned since middle school, and wrapped it gently around him. "You don't have to." Yeah, she said. "Already did." The words came out teasing, but her eyes softened. His hands brushed hers briefly, cold, fragile, shaking, and in that fleeting touch, something like gratitude passed between them. "Hold on," Nora said, gripping the handlebars. The tire squealed as she pushed off the curb, legs burning against the incline. Snow pelted her face, freezing against her lashes, but she kept going. Behind her, the old man hummed softly, a tune without words, something from another lifetime. For a while, neither spoke. The world was just wind, wheels, and breath. Finally, the man murmured, "It's colder than it used to be." "Yeah," Nora said, breath fogging the air. "World's meaner, too." He gave a soft, wheezing laugh. "Not all of it." She glanced over her shoulder and saw a faint smile on his face. Somehow, that made the cold a little easier to bear. They passed under the bridge, the river below glinting black like broken glass. Nora's phone buzzed again and again in her pocket, but she ignored it. She didn't need another reminder of what she'd lost. All she cared about now was getting him home. They reached the edge of town, where the streetlights thinned and the road narrowed into darkness. Her legs screamed with exhaustion, but she refused to stop. The man stirred behind her. "You remind me of my granddaughter," he said softly. "She used to wear gloves like yours." Nora smiled faintly, her voice catching in the cold. "Sounds like she had good taste." He laughed again, a fragile human sound against the howling wind. For a moment, the world didn't feel so cruel. That night, a poor girl guided a blind man through the snow, not knowing she was leading herself straight into destiny. The storm had softened, but the cold had not. Snow drifted sideways in thin, whispering sheets, carried by a wind that refused to rest. Streetlights flickered like tired eyes, watching as Nora Murphy pedaled through the near-empty streets, her breath coming in sharp, visible bursts. Behind her, Jacob Davidson clung quietly to the back rack of her bike, his gloved hands trembling, his cane pressed against his leg. Every bump in the road sent a jolt through his frail frame, but he didn't complain, not once. Nora's scarf, her only real protection from the night, was now wrapped snugly around his neck. The fabric had already frosted at the edges, tiny crystals of ice catching the light whenever they passed under a lamp. Her fingers ached as she gripped the handlebars. The tips had gone numb long ago, but she didn't slow down. "You doing okay back there?" she called over her shoulder, voice muffled by the wind. "I've had worse nights," Jacob replied, his tone faint but steady. She smiled at that. "I find that hard to believe." He chuckled softly, a tired wheezing sound that carried through the snow. "Oh, you'd be surprised. Some nights are colder than winter." "Sounds poetic," she teased, pedaling harder to climb a slope. "But right now, I'd settle for a heater and a bowl of soup." Jacob tilted his head slightly, as though smiling behind those dark glasses. "You're kind," he murmured. "Most people wouldn't stop." "Maybe they didn't see you," Nora said, though she knew that wasn't true. She'd seen the way people had looked at him, saw, then looked away. "They saw," Jacob replied quietly. They just forgot how to care. The words lingered in the air longer than the cold. The wind picked up again, howling through the alleyways like something alive. Nora hunched her shoulders, shielding her face. The road curved near the old church on Maple Row, its stained glass windows glowing faintly through frost. Jacob hummed softly, a slow, gentle tune that drifted out between his breaths. It was haunting and peaceful all at once, the kind of melody that felt like it had lived 1,000 lives. "What's that song?" Nora asked. He smiled faintly. "My wife used to sing it when she cooked Sunday dinner. Said it kept the house warm, even when we couldn't afford to light the fire." Nora's heart softened. "She sounds like she was nice." "She was everything," he said simply. Then, after a pause, "I lost her a long time ago. And after that, I suppose I started losing the rest of the world too." Nora didn't answer right away. The sound of the tires on snow filled the silence between them. "I lost my dad," she said finally. "Last year. Car accident. Since then, it's just me, my mom, and my little brother. I work double shifts, deliveries and mopping floors, just to keep up with the rent." Jacob's brow furrowed. "How old are you?" 17. 18 in spring. "So young," he murmured. "Carrying the weight of 3 lives." "Someone's gotta," she said with a half-smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Jacob tilted his head, listening. "Your voice," he said quietly. "You sound tired, but proud." Nora laughed dryly. "Pride doesn't pay rent, sir. Call me Jacob." "Okay then. Jacob." She smiled, tasting the name like it carried something old and gentle. "And yeah, well, rent still wins." He gave a small laugh, muffled by the scarf. "The world wasn't always like this," he said. "There was a time when people helped without question. When kindness wasn't rare." Nora exhaled a cloud of frost. "Guess the world got colder, sir." Jacob smiled faintly, echoing her words. "Guess it did." They rode on, the city falling behind them in silence. The hum of street traffic faded, replaced by the crunch of tires on snow and the distant whistle of wind through pine. Nora's legs burned. She'd been pedaling uphill for almost an hour now, and every muscle in her body begged for rest. But Jacob's breathing behind her, shallow, uneven, kept her going. She passed shuttered shops, their windows painted with frost. A neon diner sign flickered weakly, the word open half-lit. The smell of coffee and grease wafted faintly into the cold. Nora slowed, glancing back. "We can stop for a bit. You must be freezing." Jacob shook his head. "I'm fine, child. Keep going. Home's not far." "Home?" She frowned. "You said Willow End, right?" "Yes, near the hills," he murmured. She hesitated. The hills were miles away. No buses went that far this late, and no ordinary old man should have been walking that route blind. "You sure someone didn't drop you off somewhere closer?" He didn't respond right away. Just smiled faintly. "It's funny," he said. "I used to drive this very road myself. Back then, I thought I could see everything. Turns out I was blind even before I lost my sight." His words made her glance at him again. But his face, lined calm distant, gave nothing away. "Whatever that means," she muttered, shaking her head. As they crossed the bridge at the edge of town, the snow began to fall heavier again. The lamps glowed faintly through the fog, halos of gold in the white darkness. Nora's breath came ragged now. She hadn't eaten since morning. Her fingers cramped around the handlebars. She flexed them, shaking warmth back into her palms. "Need a rest?" Jacob asked softly. "I'm good," she said, though she wasn't. "You remind me of someone," he said suddenly. "Yeah. My granddaughter," he said. "She'd be your age now. Always running ahead. Always trying to save the world." Nora smiled weakly. "Sounds like she had better luck than me." Jacob tilted his head. "No. You stopped tonight. That's luck enough, for both of us." Her throat tightened. "I didn't really think. I just saw you standing there." "Sometimes," Jacob murmured, "the best decisions are the ones we don't think through." They rode on. By the time they reached the outer edge of Briar Hill Road, the snow had swallowed the city completely. The sky glowed faint gray above the horizon. Nora could barely feel her toes. She pulled over near an old bus stop shelter, a metal frame covered in frost. The seat inside was half buried in snow. "Let's stop a second," she said, voice breathless. Jacob nodded gratefully, his movements slow and stiff. She helped him off the bike, steadying him by the arm. His skin was cold through his coat. He leaned against the shelter wall, exhaling deeply. "You should have left me," he said softly. "You're freezing." "Yeah, well," she said, brushing snow off his shoulders, "I've done dumber things." He chuckled. "Such as?" "Working 2 jobs that don't pay enough for one," she said. Jacob smiled. "Then this isn't your dumbest choice yet." She laughed, rubbing her arms for warmth. "Guess not." The wind whistled through the broken glass pane. Nora looked at him, really looked. His white hair caught the dim light, his glasses reflecting faintly. He looked so out of place in the world, like someone who belonged to another time. She wondered, not for the first time, who he really was. When they set off again, the road began to change. The buildings faded into fields, and the hum of the city became the quiet whisper of snow over open land. The incline steepened, but Jacob's directions were steady and sure. "Just a little farther," he murmured. "Past the ridge." "Ridge?" she groaned. "You better be leading me to heaven, old man." He laughed quietly. "Close enough." They crested the final hill. Below, through the falling snow, Nora saw it, a faint shape of iron gates, tall and black, half hidden by fog. Beyond them, dim golden lights shimmered through trees. Her breath caught. "This can't be right," she said. "You live here." Jacob didn't answer. He only lifted his head slightly, as if sensing home. From the distance, lights flared, security lamps, sharp and blinding. A voice shouted, "Mr. Davidson." "Sir." Nora froze. Men in black coats came running toward them through the snow. One grabbed the bike, another reached for Jacob's arm. "Where have you been?" one guard cried. "We've been searching for hours." Nora blinked, heart racing. "Wait, Mr. Davidson." The nearest guard looked at her as if she'd spoken a forbidden word. "You didn't know? That's Jacob Davidson, owner of Davidson Holdings." Her breath caught in her throat. She looked back at the man she'd just biked through the storm, his calm face, his gentle voice, his frail hands. "You mean," she whispered, "you're that Davidson?" Jacob smiled faintly, turning his blind eyes toward her. "I suppose I am." The guards tried to lead him away, but he tightened his grip on Nora's arm. "Please," he said quietly. "Stay a while. You've brought me this far." She hesitated, shivering. And in that moment, surrounded by snow and disbelief, the realization hit her. She hadn't just helped a stranger home. She'd carried a billionaire through the storm. She thought she was helping a stranger home. But the path she was taking would change her life forever. Snow whispered against the iron gates, gathering in thin, white layers on the black metal like dust on an ancient secret. Nora Murphy stood frozen at the edge of the driveway, breath shallow, her pulse still racing from the climb. Her bike leaned awkwardly beside her, one tire half buried in slush. The mansion beyond the fog didn't look real. Its tall windows glowed faint amber through the haze, framed by frost and creeping ivy. The drive stretched wide, lined with silent statues and old oak trees that bent under the weight of snow. Somewhere in the distance, a fountain stood frozen mid-splash. Nora's voice trembled when she finally spoke. This can't be your place." Beside her, Jacob Davidson lifted his chin toward the sound of the wind. His blind eyes turned up faintly, like he could see the glow through memory. "It's home," he said softly. Before she could reply, shadows moved through the fog, dark figures rushing forward, boots crunching over the ice. The sudden beam of flashlights made Nora shield her eyes. "Mr. Davidson," one of them shouted. "Sir." "Thank God." The men reached them within seconds. Two of them grabbed Jacob gently by the shoulders, wrapping him in a heavy coat. The third turned to Nora, his face stern under the light. "Where did you find him?" She stammered, blinking. "He was standing at a bus stop downtown. He said he missed his bus. I just helped him get home." The man's jaw tightened. "Do you have any idea who you're talking to?" Nora frowned. What's that supposed to mean? Another guard stepped forward, brushing snow from his collar. That's Mr. Jacob Davidson, he said sharply, lowering his voice as if it carried weight. Owner of Davidson Holdings. The Davidson Holdings. The name hit like a shockwave. Nora blinked, struggling to connect the image, the frail, shivering man who had clung to her bicycle, to the headlines she'd seen once or twice on a TV she could barely afford to keep running. Davidson Holdings. The empire of tech, real estate, and philanthropy. The billionaire who hadn't been seen in public for months. Her breath caught. You're saying he's... Yes, ma'am, the guard said. The man you just biked through a blizzard is one of the richest people alive. For a heartbeat, the only sound was the wind. Nora stared at Jacob, her mind spinning between disbelief and awe. His expression, calm as always, hadn't changed. The dark glasses still hid his eyes, but she could see the faintest smile tugging at his lips. I told you I lived near the hills, he said quietly. She swallowed hard. You could have told me who you were. Would you have still stopped? The question landed deep. She wanted to say yes, of course she would have, but the truth caught in her throat. She didn't answer. Jacob didn't seem to need one. His hand reached out slowly until it brushed her sleeve, steady and sure despite the tremor in his fingers. Please, he murmured. Don't leave yet. The gates groaned open. The guards ushered them inside. The driveway curved between snow-laden hedges and tall, ancient trees. The mansion loomed larger with every step, its walls a blend of stone and shadow. Nora felt smaller with each breath. Her boots squeaked on the marble when they entered the front hall, a space so wide she could have ridden her bike in circles inside it. The chandelier above sparkled like a constellation caught in crystal. Firelight flickered from a hearth big enough to sleep in. She stood dripping onto the polished floor, her red coat heavy with melted snow. Every eye in the room turned toward her, maids, butlers, and staff in dark uniforms. Their gazes lingered just a moment too long, polite but cold, measuring her from head to toe. Jacob's voice broke the silence. Nora, he said softly, come sit by the fire. Sir, one of the attendants interjected, perhaps the young lady would prefer to wait in the foyer. Jacob's head turned sharply toward the voice. Even blind, the authority in his tone silenced the room. She's my guest. Nora hesitated. Her instinct screamed at her to leave. This wasn't her world. But something about the way Jacob's hand trembled slightly as he leaned on his cane made her stay. She followed him toward the fireplace. The heat hit her face like a memory she hadn't known she'd missed. He sat carefully in a high-backed chair, and she perched awkwardly on the edge of a velvet sofa opposite him. For a long moment, neither spoke. The only sound was the crackle of the fire. Finally, Jacob sighed. I owe you an apology, he said. Nora blinked. An apology? You don't owe me anything. I do, he insisted. I tested the world tonight, and it failed, until you. She frowned. Tested. He nodded slowly. You see, I wasn't really lost. Not at first. I wanted to know if anyone would still stop for a blind old man in the cold. His voice softened. I've spent years surrounded by people who smile when they see money, not me. I needed to know if kindness still existed somewhere I hadn't bought it. Nora stared at him. You mean, you were pretending? He shook his head gently. Not pretending. I really am blind. I just wasn't as helpless as I looked. Nora's chest tightened. She thought of the scarf she'd wrapped around his neck, the burning in her frozen legs, the fear of losing her job, and she almost laughed. So, I biked a billionaire through a blizzard, she said, her voice caught between disbelief and exhaustion. Guess I'll never live that one down. Jacob smiled faintly. You could have walked past. But you didn't. That's something even money can't buy. A maid appeared quietly, setting down 2 mugs of steaming tea. Nora wrapped her hands around hers, letting the warmth seep into her fingers. She'd forgotten what warmth felt like. Jacob leaned back, listening to the fire pop. Tell me about yourself, Nora Murphy. She hesitated. There's not much to tell. I doubt that, he said gently. She exhaled slowly. I work at a delivery service. Nights like this, I bike around the city dropping off takeout to people who don't even open the door all the way. During the day, I mop floors at a gas station near the docks. My mom's sick. My brother's 12. Rent's due Friday. Jacob listened in silence. Then quietly, and yet, you gave up your last delivery tonight to help a stranger. Didn't think about it, she said. Just, couldn't leave you there. He smiled, voice barely above a whisper. You remind me of someone I once knew. Your granddaughter? She asked. His smile faltered slightly. Yes. She used to visit every Sunday. Then life got busy, and I became another photograph on a mantle. Nora looked at him, seeing more than wealth now, seeing the quiet ache behind his calm. Guess it's lonely up here, she said softly. Lonelier than you'd think. They sat in silence again, the fire painting his face in warm gold and shadow. When she finally stood, her legs trembled. I should go, she said. It's late. Jacob turned toward her voice. Not yet, he said, his tone gentle but firm. You'll catch your death out there. She shook her head. I'll be fine. I've been through worse nights. He smiled faintly. You said that earlier. But I don't believe you. Before she could answer, he raised a hand. Please. Stay for dinner. For warmth, if nothing else. Her stomach betrayed her with a low growl. She flushed. Jacob chuckled. That settles it. He motioned toward one of the attendants. Set another place at the table. The attendant hesitated. Sir, the dining room. I said another place. The words carried the weight of command, quiet but absolute. Minutes later, Nora found herself seated at a long polished table under a chandelier that shimmered like trapped frost. The meal before her looked like something out of a dream. Soup, bread still warm, vegetables glistening with butter. She ate cautiously at first, then faster as hunger overcame manners. Jacob smiled, listening to her spoon scrape the bowl. Better. Much, she said between bites. I don't think I've ever had soup that didn't come from a can. He chuckled softly. You deserve better than cans, Nora. I'll settle for warmth, she said. And yet, he murmured, you gave yours to me. She looked down, embarrassed. Didn't feel right to leave you freezing. He nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. When she finally rose to leave, Jacob stood too, steadying himself with his cane. Nora, he said, his voice low but certain, I meant what I said. You reminded me of something I'd lost faith in, human kindness. She smiled, unsure how to respond. I just did what anyone would have done. He tilted his head, the faintest smile curling his lips. You'd be surprised how few still would. As she turned toward the door, the snowlight spilling across the marble floor, she realized that her whole world, the hunger, the struggle, the endless race to survive, had collided with another one entirely. A world of marble floors and silent servants. A world that didn't even feel real. And somehow, she had biked her way straight into it. In one night, the poorest girl in the city had walked straight into the life of one of the richest men alive. The sound of rain had replaced the snow by the time Nora sat back down at the long dining table. Outside the mansion's tall windows, the storm softened into mist that blurred the edges of the world. The golden chandelier above them flickered against crystal, casting ripples of light over the silverware and polished marble. It felt like stepping into another universe. Nora sat stiffly in her chair, trying not to touch anything that looked like it cost more than her life. Her red coat hung over the backrest, damp and steaming near the fire. The hem of her jeans was still wet from melted snow, dripping quietly onto the rug beneath her. Across from her, Jacob Davidson sat in his usual stillness, his posture composed but his face softer than before. His dark glasses caught the shimmer of the flames. The faint tremor in his hands had settled, replaced by a calm that came only with warmth and company. When the servants brought in the first course, Nora instinctively reached for her pocket as if she'd need to pay. But the butler gave her a gentle shake of his head and poured her water instead. She whispered a quiet thank you, cheeks flushing. Jacob's lips curved slightly. You're not used to being served, are you? Nora chuckled nervously. The only thing I've ever been served is eviction notices. He smiled at the sound of her laughter. It was unpolished, unguarded, and it filled the cavernous dining room with something real. They ate in near silence at first. The soup was creamy and rich, fragrant with herbs Nora couldn't name. She took small spoonfuls, both grateful and unsure if she should even be there. Jacob broke the silence with a question. Tell me something, Nora. Why did you stop for me tonight? She blinked, caught off guard. What do you mean? He turned his face toward her voice. You said yourself, you were working. You had places to be. The world doesn't stop for an old man at a bus stop, not anymore. But you did. Her fingers tightened around the spoon. Because, she started, then sighed. Because nobody else did. Jacob tilted his head slightly. Simple as that? Simple, she said. You were standing there like the world forgot you. I couldn't be one more person who did. His mouth twitched into a faint smile, but his eyes, hidden though they were, seemed to darken. You'd be surprised how easy it is to be forgotten, even by those who once swore they never would. The melancholy in his voice lingered in the air like perfume. When the next course came, a plate of roasted vegetables and soft bread, Jacob barely touched it. He sat listening to the crackle of the fire, the soft chime of cutlery, and the rhythm of Nora's breathing. I lost my sight 5 years ago, he said suddenly. Nora's fork froze midair. He smiled faintly. A blood clot behind the optic nerve. I went to bed one night after reading, and by morning, the light was gone. Her chest tightened. I'm sorry, she said quietly. He chuckled softly. Don't be. I had 73 good years of seeing. That's more than most. But I'll tell you what's crueler than blindness. She looked up, eyes wide. What's that? Isolation. His hand traced the rim of his glass. When I lost my sight, I didn't just lose vision, I lost people. Friends who didn't know what to say. Business partners who found me inconvenient. Even family who couldn't stand the silence I carried. Nora frowned. Family. My wife passed long ago, he said, his tone quiet, deliberate. My son lives across the ocean. He visits once a year, out of obligation more than love. I used to have family dinners in this very room. Laughter. Voices. He paused, his fingers trembling slightly. Now all I hear is the sound of cutlery on china. Nora stared down at her plate, guilt pressing into her chest. She didn't know how to comfort a man who had everything yet still seemed to have nothing. I guess money doesn't fix loneliness, she said softly. He turned his head toward her, lips curling in a sad smile. No. Money only buys silence in better furniture. For a moment, they both laughed, quietly, painfully, but honestly. The conversation drifted into easier waters. Nora told him about her mother's illness, about the bills she couldn't pay, about her little brother's dream of becoming a pilot. She spoke shyly at first, but Jacob listened with such intent that she forgot to feel small. You work 2 jobs? He asked. 3 sometimes, she said, dipping a piece of bread into her soup. One during the day at a gas station, another doing deliveries at night, and when my mom's medicine bills pile up, I clean houses on weekends. He nodded thoughtfully. You're stronger than most adults I know. She shrugged. Strong doesn't mean happy. No, he agreed quietly. But it means you haven't given up. She looked at him, her brown eyes catching the glow of the chandelier. I can't afford to give up, sir. Jacob, he corrected gently. Call me Jacob. Okay. Jacob. The name felt strange on her tongue, too familiar, almost forbidden, but it made him smile. When dessert arrived, Jacob refused it with a wave of his hand. Sweet things never suited me, he said. I grew up during a time when sugar was rare. You learn not to crave what you can't have. Nora smirked. Guess I missed that lesson. He chuckled, the sound dry but warm. It's refreshing hearing someone who speaks without trying to impress. I'm just saying what I think. And that's exactly why I like talking to you. The honesty between them hung like the quiet after a storm, heavy but peaceful. After dinner, Jacob asked her to walk with him to the library. The mansion's hallways stretched long and silent, lined with portraits whose painted eyes followed them as they moved. The scent of old books and polished wood filled the air. Do you read, Nora? He asked as they entered a room where shelves reached the ceiling. Not as much as I'd like, she admitted. Hard to read when you're always working. Books were my window before blindness, he said, running his fingers along a row of spines. Now they're just echoes. She looked around. You've got enough books here to build a city. He smiled faintly. A city without noise. Nora stepped closer to a table covered in half-finished braille pages. You were learning? I still am, he said proudly. Took me a year to stop hating it. But I promised myself I'd never let darkness define me. Nora admired that. You're tougher than you look. He chuckled. So are you. A moment later, his hand brushed the table, knocking over a stack of papers. Nora rushed to pick them up, kneeling at his side. As she gathered the scattered sheets, her fingers brushed against his, cold, calloused, searching. He froze. It's strange, he murmured, how a single touch can make you feel less alone. Nora looked up at him. You ever have anyone to talk to? Like really talk? He shook his head. Not in a long while. People come to take instructions, not conversation. She gave a soft smile. Then I guess tonight's different. He chuckled again, the sound weaker this time but genuine. It is. They sat together by the fire once more before she left. The logs hissed and cracked, filling the silence. Do you ever wish you could see again? She asked quietly. Jacob considered the question. Sometimes. But not as often as you might think. The world looks clearer when you stop judging it by appearances. She nodded slowly, thinking of the people who had walked past him earlier that night, the ones who couldn't be bothered to help. Maybe they were blind too, she whispered. He smiled faintly. Maybe. She looked at him then, really looked. The frail man before her wasn't just wealthy or broken. He was human, tired, lost, and strangely kind. And somewhere in his stillness, she saw something she hadn't expected, gratitude. Thank you, Nora, he said, his voice almost breaking. For what? For stopping. For staying. She swallowed hard. You don't have to thank me for being human. He tilted his head toward her, that faint smile returning. Then you're rarer than you know. When she finally rose to leave, he didn't stop her this time. He simply said, You'll come back tomorrow? She hesitated. If you want me to. I do. Her chest ached with something she couldn't name. Then I will. Jacob nodded slowly, his face illuminated by firelight. Good. It's been a long time since this house felt alive. Nora smiled softly. Guess it just needed company. He laughed quietly but genuinely, the kind of laugh that carries the weight of years and the relief of rediscovered warmth. And as she walked out into the fading night, pulling her red coat tight against the cold, the echo of that laughter followed her like a promise. In her kindness, he found the thing his billions could never buy, faith in humanity. The morning after the snowstorm, sunlight streamed through the mansion's tall windows, catching the dust motes as they floated like golden ghosts. For the first time in years, the house felt awake. The scent of coffee drifted from the kitchen, mingling with the soft rustle of footsteps on marble. Nora stood at the edge of the grand foyer, clutching her red coat, uncertain whether she should have come back. She'd promised Jacob she would, but promises made in warmth felt heavier in daylight. The butler, Mr. Hayes, gave her a polite but wary nod. Mr. Davidson is expecting you, Miss Murphy. He's in the conservatory. Thank you, she murmured, her voice small in the vast hall. As she followed the path of sunlight toward the glass-walled room, she couldn't shake the feeling that she didn't belong here. Everything gleamed, polished brass, framed landscapes, chandeliers like frozen fireworks. She caught her reflection in a mirror and almost didn't recognize herself. The tired delivery girl from Maple Brook looked out of place among the world of wealth. And yet, Jacob had asked for her. He sat surrounded by plants and light, a blanket over his lap, the morning sun touching his silver hair. His dark glasses reflected the garden outside, though his eyes saw none of it. Nora, he said, smiling as soon as he heard her steps. You came. Of course I did, she said softly. You asked. I wasn't sure you would. Well, she said, slipping into the chair opposite him, you don't ignore someone who offers you free soup and a seat by a fireplace. Jacob chuckled, his laugh still fragile but more alive than last night. I like that about you. You speak plainly. I don't know any other way. He tilted his head toward her voice. Keep that. The world tries to polish people until they forget how to sound like themselves. Nora smiled faintly. I don't think anyone's ever tried to polish me, sir. Jacob, he reminded her. Right. Jacob. The way she said his name, without reverence, without fear, made him feel human again. They talked for a while about the weather, the news, the absurdity of people who complained about cold from behind heated glass. But soon, Jacob steered the conversation toward her. So tell me about your mother, he said gently. Nora hesitated. She's been sick for a while. Asthma mostly. Sometimes worse. And your father? Never knew him, she said, her tone flat. Mom says he left before I could talk. Jacob nodded slowly, absorbing her honesty. You carry a lot for someone your age. She looked down at her hands. Somebody has to. My little brother's only 9. He still believes things get better. I don't want to take that from him. You work nights delivering food? Yeah. And mornings at a gas station. The manager says I've got grit, but I think he just likes that I don't complain. Jacob smiled faintly. Grit will take you farther than luck ever could. Luck would still be nice though, she said, smirking. He laughed quietly, a sound that carried gratitude. You remind me of someone I used to know. My wife, Eleanor. She never waited for luck either. She built her own. Nora looked up, surprised. She sounds like she was strong. She was the strongest person I ever met, he said softly. And she taught me that strength isn't loud, it's quiet, stubborn and kind. Like you. Her throat tightened, unsure how to respond. Compliments weren't something she trusted. Later, as they sipped tea, Jacob turned the subject once more. You said last night you couldn't afford to stop working. That one late delivery could cost you rent. Is that still true? Nora gave a dry laugh. It's always true. Rent's due Friday. I'll make it. Somehow. Jacob's fingers tapped the armrest. And your mother's medicine? Nora frowned. Why are you asking all this? He smiled gently. Because I want to know what kind of world I live in now. The kind that makes children carry the weight of adults. She sighed. It's just how it is. No, he said quietly. It's how we've allowed it to be. Their silence lingered, filled with the faint chirp of birds outside and the hum of distant heaters. Then Jacob said something she didn't expect. You reminded me that good still exists, Nora. And I intend to return the favor. She blinked. What does that mean? He smiled enigmatically. It means, sometimes kindness deserves to echo. That same afternoon, while Nora helped him identify letters from the Braille alphabet, Jacob made a private call. Get in touch with St. Mary's Hospital, he told his assistant. A woman named Sarah Murphy. Chronic respiratory illness. I want her bills handled anonymously. The assistant hesitated. Sir, should I tell her it's from? No, Jacob said firmly. She'll know it came from somewhere that still believes in goodness. That's enough. Over the next week, Nora visited every day after her shifts. She read aloud from old novels, helped Jacob feed the birds in his greenhouse, and sometimes just sat beside him in silence. He began to laugh more. The mansion felt less like a museum and more like a home. The staff, though stiff at first, started to smile when she walked in. But beyond the estate gates, whispers began to stir. A photograph had surfaced, taken the night she first arrived. A security camera had caught a grainy image of Nora helping Jacob onto her bicycle. Another showed her entering his home the next morning. By evening, a headline blared across gossip sites. Billionaire Jacob Davidson seen with teen girl from Maplebrook, mystery companion sparks rumors. The first time Nora saw it was on a customer's phone during her gas station shift. Her chest went cold. Oh my God, she whispered. No. By the time she reached the mansion that night, reporters were already outside the gates. Flashbulbs flared like lightning as she passed. Miss Murphy. Are you the girl in the pictures? Are you dating Mr. Davidson? Did he pay you to keep him company? Each question cut deeper than the cold ever could. She ran inside, trembling. Jacob was waiting in the drawing room, the article already printed on his desk. I'm so sorry, she blurted out before he could speak. I didn't mean for any of this. I didn't even know someone took photos. I swear I. He raised a hand, calm as still water. Nora, breathe. Tears welled in her eyes. They're saying awful things. That I'm using you. That I'm pretending to be some kind of saint. Do you care what they say? Her voice cracked. Of course I do. I have nothing, Jacob. Nothing to defend myself with. He leaned forward, resting a hand gently over hers. You have truth. That's more than most people with power can claim. She shook her head. But it's not enough. Then let me help. How? She whispered. He smiled faintly. By telling them the truth myself. The next morning, every major news outlet replayed footage from an impromptu press conference. Jacob Davidson, escorted by his aides, stood before the cameras outside his mansion. Though blind, his posture was tall, his voice firm. I've seen the headlines, he began. I've heard the rumors. So let me make something clear. The young woman in those photographs is not what your stories suggest. She is the reason I still believe humanity isn't lost. Reporters exchanged glances. Flashbulbs erupted. She didn't seek me out, Jacob continued. She found me lost and freezing on a street corner, when no one else would stop. I owe her my safety, and perhaps my life. So if you must write a story, write that one. The crowd fell silent. Nora, watching from inside, felt her chest tighten. For the first time, someone had stood up for her, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. Later that evening, Jacob's statement dominated headlines again, this time under a new title. Davidson defends girl who saved him. Compassion needs no permission. When Nora returned to the conservatory the next day, Jacob was sitting in the same chair, sunlight on his face. You didn't have to do that, she said quietly. He smiled. Yes, I did. You helped me when it cost you something. The least I can do is help you when it costs me nothing. Tears filled her eyes. You've already done too much. No, he said softly. You gave me back my faith. You reminded me that goodness isn't extinct. That's a debt I'll never repay, but I'll spend the rest of my life trying. Nora sat beside him, silent, overwhelmed. For a moment, neither spoke. The air between them was warm, honest, alive. Outside, the world continued to whisper its half-truths. But inside those walls, something unspoken had shifted. Jacob no longer saw Nora as the girl who helped him. She had become his mirror, reflecting back the kind of person he once wanted to be. And for the first time since losing his sight, he no longer felt blind. The world saw a scandal. Jacob saw a savior. By the time she reached the mansion that night, reporters were already outside the gates. Flashbulbs flared like lightning as she passed. Miss Murphy. Are you the girl in the pictures? Are you dating Mr. Davidson? Did he pay you to keep him company? Each question cut deeper than the cold ever could. She ran inside, trembling. Jacob was waiting in the drawing room, the article already printed on his desk. I'm so sorry, she blurted out before he could speak. I didn't mean for any of this. I didn't even know someone took photos. I swear I. He raised a hand, calm as still water. Nora, breathe. Tears welled in her eyes. They're saying awful things. That I'm using you. That I'm pretending to be some kind of saint. Do you care what they say? Her voice cracked. Of course I do. I have nothing, Jacob. Nothing to defend myself with. He leaned forward, resting a hand gently over hers. You have truth. That's more than most people with power can claim. She shook her head. But it's not enough. Then let me help. How? She whispered. He smiled faintly. By telling them the truth myself. The next morning, every major news outlet replayed footage from an impromptu press conference. Jacob Davidson, escorted by his aides, stood before the cameras outside his mansion. Though blind, his posture was tall, his voice firm. I've seen the headlines, he began. I've heard the rumors. So let me make something clear. The young woman in those photographs is not what your stories suggest. She is the reason I still believe humanity isn't lost. Reporters exchanged glances. Flashbulbs erupted. She didn't seek me out, Jacob continued. She found me lost and freezing on a street corner, when no one else would stop. I owe her my safety, and perhaps my life. So if you must write a story, write that one." The crowd fell silent. Nora, watching from inside, felt her chest tighten. For the first time, someone had stood up for her, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. Later that evening, Jacob's statement dominated headlines again, this time under a new title. Davidson defends girl who saved him. Compassion needs no permission. When Nora returned to the conservatory the next day, Jacob was sitting in the same chair, sunlight on his face. "You didn't have to do that," she said quietly. He smiled. "Yes, I did. You helped me when it cost you something. The least I can do is help you when it costs me nothing." Tears filled her eyes. "You've already done too much." "No," he said softly. "You gave me back my faith. You reminded me that goodness isn't extinct. That's a debt I'll never repay, but I'll spend the rest of my life trying." Nora sat beside him, silent, overwhelmed. For a moment, neither spoke. The air between them was warm, honest, alive. Outside, the world continued to whisper its half-truths. But inside those walls, something unspoken had shifted. Jacob no longer saw Nora as the girl who helped him. She had become his mirror, reflecting back the kind of person he once wanted to be. And for the first time since losing his sight, he no longer felt blind. The world saw a scandal. Jacob saw a savior. The snow had long melted from the streets of Maple Brook, but the frost of rumor clung tighter than ice. What began as a whisper had become a storm, and this time, it wasn't weather that battered Jacob Davidson's mansion. It was the press. Each morning, the gates trembled under the weight of flashing cameras, voices shouting questions through the iron bars. "Mr. Davidson, is the girl living with you? Is she your caretaker or your latest charity project? Does she have influence over your estate decisions?" The questions blurred into static, but inside the mansion, every word found its way through cracks in the silence. Nora stood by the tall windows of the conservatory, staring at the swarm of reporters below. They looked like vultures waiting for a story to die. The same people who ignored her existence weeks ago now fought to define it. "I didn't ask for this," she muttered. Behind her, Mr. Hayes, the butler, adjusted his cuffs. "They never ask. They just take." His tone was careful, but his eyes carried something colder, something like blame. Jacob's voice called faintly from the adjoining room. "Nora, is that you?" "Yes, I'm here," she answered, forcing steadiness into her voice. She entered to find him sitting by the fire, his skin pale and drawn. His health had begun to falter, exhaustion, stress, and perhaps something deeper. He smiled weakly. "The birds didn't sing this morning. Even they know when storms are coming." She knelt beside him. "You shouldn't worry about all this noise. It'll fade soon." Jacob tilted his head, his blind eyes turning toward her voice. "No, it won't. The world loves tearing down what it doesn't understand. But I'm more worried about you." "Me?" "They've made you a headline. And headlines are cruel things. They never tell the truth, only the story people want to hear." Her throat tightened. "I'm fine." He reached out, his trembling hand brushing against hers. "No, you're not. You're pretending for my sake." Nora swallowed hard. "I just don't want to be the reason everything you built starts to crumble." Jacob smiled faintly. "Everything I built? My dear, that's the problem. I built it all, but for what? None of it mattered until someone like you reminded me what kindness looks like." But outside those walls, the kindness Jacob cherished had turned into controversy. Within days, the media crowned Nora the sympathy story of the season. Talk shows debated her motives. Bloggers dissected her clothes, her voice, her background. "Is she manipulating the old billionaire?" one headline read. "From rags to riches, or just smart timing," said another. Even the employees began to whisper behind her back. One afternoon, as Nora passed the service corridor, she heard them. "Girl's clever, I'll give her that," said one maid. "Gets in good with the boss. Now she's sitting in the drawing room every day. Probably planning to write a book next," another laughed. "How to warm a billionaire's heart." Laughter filled the hallway, brittle and cruel. Nora froze, the tray in her hands shaking. Her cheeks burned. Maybe she's not bad, one voice added mockingly. Just knows how to play the angel act. The tray slipped from her hands. It hit the floor with a shattering crash. The laughter stopped instantly. She didn't pick it up. She just walked away. That night, she couldn't sleep. The house, usually so grand and comforting, felt like a cage made of whispers. She sat by the window, looking out at the snow-covered gardens, wondering when compassion had turned into suspicion. Her phone buzzed on the table. A message from an unknown number. You're trending again. Enjoy the fame while it lasts. She closed her eyes, fighting back tears. The next morning, she found Jacob sitting at his desk, papers spread before him. He was coughing more than usual. You shouldn't be working, she said softly. He smiled faintly. And you shouldn't be worrying about me. I'm not worrying. I'm lying, he interrupted gently. You always lie when you start with that tone. She smiled sadly. Maybe. Jacob's tone softened. The board came to see me yesterday. Her brow furrowed. Your board? The company one. He nodded. They think my new companion is bad for business. They're calling it bad optics. Her heart sank. They said that. They said much worse. He sighed, his voice thinning. They fear charity makes me look unstable. That the company needs distance from this friendship. Then tell them the truth, she said, her voice breaking. Tell them I didn't ask for anything from you. Tell them you helped me because you helped me first? Jacob smiled gently. They wouldn't understand. They speak in numbers, not hearts. Then I'll leave, Nora said suddenly. Jacob's face turned toward her sharply. What? I'll go. It's me they hate, not you. If I leave, they'll stop. He reached out, his hand trembling as it searched the air. Don't say that. You can't let them win. She stepped closer, taking his hand in both of hers. Sometimes leaving isn't losing, Jacob. Sometimes it's the only way to protect what's left. He shook his head. No. You belong here. Her voice wavered. You don't understand. I never belonged here. I'm just a girl with a red coat and a busted bike. You're Jacob Davidson. He smiled faintly. And what good is being Jacob Davidson if I can't even keep the only person who sees me? Tears stung her eyes. Please don't make this harder. She let go of his hand before she could change her mind. That night, the house slept. Nora didn't. She packed her few belongings quietly, her red coat, her worn gloves, and the photograph Jacob's staff had taken of them feeding birds by the window. As she zipped her bag, she looked once more at the mansion walls. For a moment, she imagined Jacob waking up in the morning, calling her name, expecting her to answer. I'm sorry, she whispered into the empty room. But the world doesn't forgive kindness. Outside, the snow had returned, soft, slow, unhurried. It swallowed the sound of her footsteps as she crossed the courtyard and disappeared into the cold. When dawn broke, Jacob called for her as he always did. Nora. No answer. He waited, thinking she was in the kitchen, or tending to the birds. But by noon, his voice had lost its calm. Nora. Mr. Hayes entered, his face grave. Sir, she's gone. Jacob's world tilted. Gone. She left a note. Said she didn't want to cause more trouble. Jacob's hands trembled as he unfolded the small piece of paper. Her handwriting was uneven, hurried. You once told me kindness deserves to echo. Maybe it will, someday. But right now, it's too loud out there. I can't breathe in the noise. Thank you for seeing me when no one else did. N. His fingers clenched around the letter. Get the car, he rasped. I'll find her. Sir, your doctors. Now. But when he stood, his legs gave out beneath him. The butler caught him before he hit the ground. Sir, please. You must rest. Jacob's chest heaved, his vision spinning though his eyes saw nothing. The pain wasn't just in his body, it was in the silence she left behind. That silence grew over the days that followed, filling the mansion like fog. He refused meetings, refused food, refused company. When asked why, he said only, because the only thing that ever made this place feel alive has walked away. Outside, the press found new stories to devour. The mansion quieted. The headlines faded. But inside those walls, Jacob Davidson grew frail, not from illness, but from emptiness. The same emptiness that had filled his life before Nora walked into it. The same emptiness she had once replaced with laughter. Now, the house was silent again. And though he couldn't see the world, he felt its judgment pressing down harder than ever. The girl who gave him light had vanished into the cold again. The news broke quietly, like a candle flickering out in the wind. Billionaire Jacob Davidson collapses during board meeting, rushed to St. Augustine Hospital. The anchor's voice was calm, professional, but the words hit Nora like a gunshot. She froze where she stood, halfway through serving coffee at the diner, her tray trembling in her hands. For a moment, she thought she'd misheard. But the screen above the counter confirmed it, his name, his photo, the headline looping again and again. The customers kept talking, the clatter of dishes continued, but Nora's world had gone utterly still. Her manager's voice broke through the noise. "Murphy, you gonna stand there all day?" She didn't answer. She just ripped off her apron and ran. Outside, the wind was fierce, but it couldn't rival the storm inside her chest. Her bus pass had expired, so she ran through the sleet and slush, shoes slipping on the icy pavement. Every block blurred. Every breath burned. All she could see was Jacob's pale smile, the way he'd lifted his blind eyes toward her voice, trusting her without question. She'd left him. Walked away when he needed her most. And now, he might never wake up. By the time she reached St. Augustine's, her lungs were on fire. The hospital loomed tall and sterile against the gray skyline, its glass doors sliding open with a mechanical sigh. She stumbled to the reception desk. "Jacob Davidson," she gasped. "He was brought in. Please tell me he's okay." The nurse looked up, cautious. "Are you family?" Nora's heart dropped. The question sliced through her. She didn't know how to answer. Family? No. Not by blood. But something deeper bound them, something unspoken. Her voice cracked. "I'm someone who cares." The nurse studied her for a long moment, then sighed. "Room 409. He's in intensive care. But only one visitor at a time." The hallway smelled of antiseptic and quiet despair. Machines hummed softly behind closed doors. Nora walked slowly, her reflection ghosting across the glass. When she reached his room, she stopped. Jacob lay motionless beneath the white sheets, tubes and wires tracing paths across his frail body. His skin was the color of paper. His lips, pale and trembling even in rest. For a moment, she couldn't breathe. Guilt pressed down on her chest like a weight she couldn't lift. "Hey, old man," she whispered, voice trembling. "You weren't supposed to do this without me." She pulled a chair close and sat beside him, taking his hand gently. It was cold, cold like that night in the snow. She rubbed warmth into it, tears blurring her vision. "I left because I thought I was helping," she said softly. "But maybe I was just scared. Scared of not belonging. Scared that the world was right about me." The monitors beeped steadily, indifferent to her confession. "I'm sorry," she whispered, squeezing his hand. "Please wake up. I still need you to tell me your bad jokes." Hours passed. Night crept over the city, painting the windows with faint reflections of rain. Nora stayed. She refused to leave, even when nurses told her visiting hours were over. She just sat there, whispering stories from her day, small ordinary things. The way her little brother had drawn her a picture. The smell of coffee and bleach at the diner. The sound of the street musicians who played near her bus stop. And then, somewhere between the silence and the hum of machines, a sound broke through. A weak breath. Then another. Nora looked up sharply. Jacob's fingers twitched in her palm. His eyes fluttered open, unfocused, cloudy but alive. "Jacob," she whispered. His lips moved. "You came back." She choked on a sob, pressing his hand against her cheek. "Of course I did." He smiled faintly. "You shouldn't have. The world won't like it." "I don't care what the world likes," she said through tears. "I owed you one." He squeezed her hand weakly. "No. I owed you everything." Over the next few days, Jacob recovered slowly, his spirit flickering back to life. Doctors called it a remarkable turn, but Nora knew it was something deeper, something stubborn and sacred. When he was strong enough to speak more than a few words, he called for his lawyer. "Nora," he said one morning, as sunlight spilled through the blinds, "I want you to help me build something." She frowned. "You should be resting." He chuckled softly. "I've been resting all my life. Now I want to live." She raised an eyebrow. "What are you talking about?" "The world doesn't need another business," he said. "It needs compassion. Something you taught me that night." Nora's heart thudded. "Jacob." He interrupted, his voice firm despite its fragility. "I'm founding something new. The Angel Initiative." "The what?" He smiled faintly. "A foundation. To support youth who remind the world what kindness looks like. To give second chances. To help people like you." Her throat tightened. "You don't have to do that for me." "I'm not," he said gently. "I'm doing it because of you." The following week, lawyers filled the hospital conference room. Journalists waited outside, hungry for another headline. When Jacob's decision became public, the world gasped. Blind billionaire names teenage girl as personal humanitarian advisor. Davidson's mysterious protege to lead new global foundation. Cameras flashed. Speculation soared. But this time, neither of them hid. Jacob, seated in his wheelchair, addressed the press himself. His voice was steady, resolute. "Months ago," he began, "I wandered into the cold, wondering if kindness still existed. A girl I'd never met gave me her scarf and her time. She guided me home when no one else would. That girl reminded me that compassion is not weakness, it is the world's most powerful wealth." He turned his blind eyes toward Nora. "Her name is Nora Murphy. And today, she will help me lead the Angel Initiative. Together, we will make sure no one is ever invisible again." The room erupted in questions, flashes, disbelief, but Nora didn't care. She was crying too hard to speak. When the conference ended, she turned to him. "You really didn't have to do that, Jacob." He smiled softly. "You're wrong. I had to. Because the night you helped me cross that street, I stopped being blind to what truly mattered." Later, back in his hospital room, the noise faded. The cameras were gone. The world outside buzzed with headlines, but inside, it was just the two of them, like before. Nora sat beside him, watching the sunset pour gold across his face. "You really think people will care about this foundation?" she asked. He chuckled. "Not everyone. But someone will. And that's enough. You taught me that, remember?" She smiled. "I still think you're crazy." "Good," he said. "It takes a little madness to change the world." A comfortable silence fell between them. The kind that feels like peace. Nora glanced at him. "Jacob." "Yes." "When I first saw you that night, I thought you were the one who needed saving." He turned toward her voice, his eyes glinting faintly beneath the light. "Maybe I was." She smiled sadly. "But maybe, we saved each other." Jacob nodded, a tear slipping down the crease of his weathered cheek. The blind billionaire could no longer see the world, but through your heart, Nora, I finally could. Outside, the snow began to fall again, gentle and slow. It blanketed the streets where their story had begun, softening the world into silence. Inside that quiet, two souls, one weary, one young, had rewritten what it meant to truly see. The blind billionaire could no longer see the world, but through her heart, he finally could. The first snow of December drifted softly outside the hospital window, white flakes floating like feathers over the city skyline. Inside, sunlight spilled gently across the room where Nora and Jacob sat, the old man now dressed in a fine gray suit instead of a hospital gown, his cane resting across his lap. The quiet hum of life pulsed through the space, nurses moving briskly, monitors beeping faintly, but between them, there was a different kind of stillness. The kind that comes only when two people know something sacred has begun. Jacob's voice broke the silence, warm but steady. "It's time, Nora." She looked up from the stack of folders she'd been sorting through, grant proposals, youth applications, handwritten letters from kids all over the city. "Time for what?" "For us to begin what we promised," he said. "The Angel Initiative." The name still made her chest tighten every time she heard it. 2 weeks later, the world changed again. A stage. Cameras. Reporters. The glow of lights bright enough to rival the snowfall outside. At the front of the grand auditorium, a large banner hung across the wall. The Angel Initiative, restoring hope, one act of kindness at a time. Nora stood beside Jacob, her heart pounding. Her red coat, the same one she'd worn that fateful night, had been carefully pressed. It felt like armor now, a reminder of where she came from. Jacob's assistant leaned in. "We're live in 5, Mr. Davidson." Jacob nodded faintly, then turned toward Nora. His eyes, clouded by blindness but alive with purpose, seemed to find her perfectly. "You nervous?" he asked. She smiled shakily. "A little." "You?" He chuckled softly. "Terrified. But I have my angel beside me." She rolled her eyes. "Your stubborn old man, you mean?" He grinned. "That too." The cameras flashed. The applause began. And then Jacob spoke. "Months ago," he began, his voice carrying through the hall, "I wandered into a city street alone, blind, lost, and unseen. Hundreds passed me by. Only one stopped. A teenage girl with no reason to care and nothing to gain." He paused. The audience leaned forward. That moment reminded me that humanity's greatest wealth isn't stored in banks or companies. It's in compassion. And that is why we are here today, to build something that gives back what I once lost, faith in people. He turned toward Nora. "You saw me when no one else did. Now, let's make sure no one goes unseen again." Applause erupted, echoing through the hall. Cameras zoomed in on Nora, who fought the sting of tears as she stepped up to the podium. "Mr. Davidson likes to call me his angel," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "But the truth is, he saved me too. I was just a girl trying to survive, working 2 jobs, hoping to keep the lights on for my family. That night, I thought I was helping a blind man cross the street. I didn't know I was crossing into a new life." Her eyes glimmered as she looked out at the crowd: journalists, business leaders, children from shelters, community organizers. "Kindness isn't weakness," she said softly. "It's the only thing strong enough to outlive us." The room fell silent, that deep reverent silence that comes when truth lands squarely in the heart. The days that followed were a whirlwind. News outlets who once mocked her story now called it the modern miracle. Articles that had once sneered, "Billionaire's teenage companion raises eyebrows," now read from scandal to salvation, "The girl who restored a tycoon's faith." The Angel Initiative launched with staggering momentum. Its mission was simple yet profound: to find young dreamers from underprivileged backgrounds and give them resources, mentorship, and dignity. But for Jacob and Nora, it was more than a program. It was redemption. Their first stop was a community shelter in Brooklyn. The air inside smelled of disinfectant and weary hope. Children sat in worn coats, doing homework under flickering lights. A woman in a faded green sweater introduced herself as the director. "We're honored you're here, Mr. Davidson," she said, shaking his hand. Jacob smiled faintly. "The honor's mine. I know what it means to be lost, even with everything." Nora knelt beside a small boy at a table, his pencil tapping nervously. "What are you working on?" "Math," he mumbled. "I'm bad at it." She smiled gently. "That's what I used to say. Guess what? I got better." He looked up at her, uncertain. "You did?" "Yes," she said, lowering her voice conspiratorially. "Wanna know a secret? It's not about being smart. It's about not giving up when you feel small." The boy grinned. "Okay." From across the room, Jacob listened quietly, his heart heavy with something he hadn't felt in years: pride. Not in wealth, not in success, but in seeing kindness grow beyond himself. By spring, the Angel Initiative had funded programs in 3 cities: literacy centers, mentorship hubs, scholarship drives. Everywhere they went, Nora spoke with kids, sat with single mothers, and shook hands with strangers who saw themselves in her story. Jacob often teased her. "You've become the face of hope, Nora Murphy." She'd laugh. "And you're still the voice behind it." But she could see him fading, not from illness, but from surrender. The kind of peaceful fading that comes when someone has finally done what they were meant to do. One evening, They stood together on the balcony of his estate, overlooking the city lights. The air was crisp, full of quiet snow. "You ever think about that night?" Jacob asked. Nora smiled. "Every day." "Funny," he said, chuckling softly. "I thought I was testing humanity. Turns out, humanity was testing me." She laughed lightly. "Guess we both passed." He turned his head slightly, his eyes glazed but full of warmth. "You remind me of something my wife used to say. If you ever lose your way, look for the one who's walking without fear." Nora swallowed hard. "You think I walk without fear?" He smiled. "No. I think you walk through it. That's braver." Weeks passed. The Angel Initiative's impact rippled across communities. Donations poured in. Politicians praised it. Even cynics admitted the partnership was extraordinary. But for Jacob and Nora, the real success wasn't in headlines, it was in the moments no one filmed. Like when a young girl at a shelter whispered, "I want to be like you, Miss Nora." Or when Jacob received a letter from an orphan boy that simply read, "Thank you for seeing me." Those were the real dividends, the kind that couldn't be cashed, only felt. On the night of the Foundation's first anniversary, they hosted a small dinner at the mansion. The chandeliers glowed golden. The table was long and filled with the laughter of volunteers, staff, and children from the shelters they'd helped. Jacob sat at the head, Kane resting beside him, his smile unguarded. "Do you hear that?" he said softly. Nora tilted her head. "Hear what?" "The sound of life happening," he murmured. "It's louder than money." Nora smiled, eyes glistening. "You did this, Jacob." He shook his head. "We did this. You gave me the reason." A moment of silence passed between them, comfortable and complete. Then, Jacob raised his glass. To the night that changed everything. To a girl who stopped when no one else did. And to what came after. Everyone lifted their glasses. The room shimmered with warmth. Later that night, as the guests began to leave, Nora helped Jacob to his study. He settled into his armchair, his hand finding hers instinctively. "You know," he said, his voice softer now, "you keep calling me your stubborn old man." She grinned. "Well, it's true." He chuckled. "Maybe. But I think I prefer Angel's accomplice." She laughed quietly. "That one's new." He leaned back, sighing. "From the night you gave me warmth, we built something that will warm the world." Her eyes filled again, but this time with peace. "Then we did it right." Outside, snow fell again, thick, slow, gentle. The same kind of snow that had once hidden two strangers beneath its silence. But now, the world wasn't cold anymore. It had a little more light. From the night she gave him warmth, they built something that would warm the world. The mansion was quieter now. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that echoes through marble halls and settles heavy in the air, the silence that follows a lifetime of noise finally coming to rest. Outside, the gardens were in bloom again. Tulips stretched toward the sun, just as they had on the day the Angel Initiative was launched. But Jacob Davidson, the man who once filled the air with his rich, warm laughter, was gone. He had passed in his sleep, peaceful, dignified, and smiling, according to the nurse who found him. A faint breeze had brushed through the curtains that morning, carrying the scent of spring into the room where he took his final breath. When the call came, Nora dropped the phone. She didn't scream. She didn't speak. She simply sat down on the cold kitchen floor, her trembling hands covering her face as tears fell through her fingers. For a long time she stayed there, remembering his voice, his smile, his cane tapping lightly across the marble floor. Remembering the way he'd said, "Through your heart, I finally see." The days that followed blurred together, condolences, reporters, flowers stacked at the mansion gates. The world mourned a billionaire. But Nora mourned something deeper, the loss of her only true friend. The funeral was private. Just the staff, the foundation team, a few old business partners, and dozens of children from the programs they had built together. The Angel Initiative choir sang softly, their young voices carrying a fragile hope that floated through the air like light rain. Nora sat in the front row, wearing her red coat, the one she'd worn that first night in the snow. It felt right. It felt like memory. As the coffin was lowered, she stepped forward, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you," she said, "for seeing me when no one else did." The crowd was silent. Even the wind seemed to stop. A week later, Nora was called back to the mansion for the reading of Jacob's will. The attorney, a silver-haired man with half-moon glasses, greeted her with a soft nod. "Miss Murphy," he said kindly, "Mr. Davidson was very specific about today. He wanted this moment to be just between you and the law." She managed a small, tearful smile. "That sounds like him." They sat across from each other in the grand study, the same room where Jacob had once teased her about calling him my stubborn old man. Now the fire that used to warm that space had gone out. The attorney unfolded the thick document, cleared his throat, and began to read. "I, Jacob William Davidson, being of sound mind and heart full of gratitude, do hereby leave the following." Nora's eyes blurred with tears before the words could even sink in. The mansion, every chandelier, every painting, every stone, was now in her name. The Angel Initiative, all its rights, funds, and decision-making authority, would continue under her leadership. A trust fund had been created for her mother's medical care and her brother's education, to last for life. The attorney paused. "And lastly," he said gently, sliding a small white envelope across the table, he left this. In his own handwriting. Nora stared at it. Her fingers trembled as she reached for it. Her heart raced. The handwriting on the front was uneven, delicate, as though written by touch rather than sight. It read simply, "For Nora, my light." She unfolded the paper carefully, afraid it might tear from the weight of her own hands. Inside, Jacob's words flowed like whispers from another world. "My dearest Nora, if you're reading this, it means I've gone where sight no longer matters, but kindness still does. I want you to know that you saved me. Not with grand gestures or riches, but with something far rarer, humanity. You reminded me that even in darkness, light can find you if you dare to stop and care. Be that light for others. Always. Don't let the world change your heart, Nora. Let your heart change the world. I am proud of you, more than words can say. With eternal gratitude, Jacob." Her vision blurred completely now. The tears came hard and fast, dripping onto the paper, smudging his final words. She pressed the letter to her chest and let the grief come, raw, unfiltered, and holy. For the first time since his death, she let herself sob. Hours passed. The fire crackled to life again, lit by one of the staff members who had served Jacob for decades. They left quietly afterward, leaving Nora alone in the golden light of evening. She sat on the floor beside Jacob's old armchair, letter in hand. It felt like he was still there, as if any moment, he'd clear his throat and make one of his dry jokes. Her whisper broke the silence. "You were my angel too." The words hung in the air like a prayer, fragile, but powerful enough to fill the whole room. The next morning, she woke to the sound of birds outside the window. The world was already moving on. But Nora wasn't the same girl who once feared losing her job for helping a stranger. She stood before the mirror, wearing the red coat that had followed her through every chapter of their story. Her reflection was calm. Her eyes were older, wiser, but bright. She walked outside to the garden, Jacob's favorite place, where a marble bench had been placed under the oak tree. Carved into its surface were the words, "Through kindness we see." She sat down, the morning sun warming her face. In her hand, she still held the letter. Then, she made a silent promise. That his dream would not die with him. That the Angel Initiative would continue to grow, not as charity, but as a movement. For the orphans. For the lost. For anyone who had ever felt unseen. Weeks later, at the Foundation's new headquarters, Nora stood before a crowd of young faces, children and teens from neighborhoods like hers. Behind her, a portrait of Jacob hung on the wall, his faint smile captured forever in oil paint. She took a deep breath and began, her voice steady, though her heart trembled. "Once upon a time," she said, "I helped a blind man cross the street. But in truth, he helped me cross into purpose." The room was silent, every eye fixed on her. He used to say that kindness is the one investment that never loses value. And now it's our turn to invest, in each other, in hope, in humanity. She looked up at Jacob's portrait and smiled softly. "Let's make him proud." Applause erupted. The sound filled the hall, loud and alive, the sound of legacy. Later that evening, when the lights dimmed and the building emptied, Nora returned to her office. On her desk sat Jacob's cane, resting exactly where she had left it the day he passed. She ran her hand along its smooth surface and whispered, "Still guiding me, aren't you?" The wind outside rustled the curtains, and for a fleeting second, she swore she could hear his laugh, quiet, familiar, full of light. Nora smiled through her tears. She turned off the lights, slipped Jacob's letter into her bag, and stepped into the night, the city glowing before her like a promise kept. She had guided him home that night, but in truth, he'd guided her toward her destiny. The first snow of the season had arrived. Soft, steady flakes drifted down from a pearl-gray sky, settling over the city like a whispered blessing. The streets glistened beneath streetlights, and the faint hum of cameras, murmurs, and footsteps filled the plaza in front of a newly built glass building, its name etched in silver across the entrance. The Jacob Davidson Foundation. Nora Murphy stood at the podium, her red coat buttoned neatly, the same one she had worn that fateful night a year ago. The cold air bit at her cheeks, but she barely felt it. Her pulse was steady, her hands calm. Behind her, the foundation's banner swayed in the winter wind. In front of her, rows of journalists, donors, and community members watched, waiting for her to speak. It had taken 12 long months of rebuilding, of turning grief into action, and memory into mission. But now, it was done. The foundation Jacob had dreamed of was real. And it was alive. A light snow drifted through the spotlights as she stepped forward and adjusted the microphone. For a moment, she looked up at the sky, at the flakes tumbling down in quiet rhythm. Then she smiled. "It's strange," she began softly, her voice echoing against the marble. "How a single moment can change everything." The crowd leaned in. "It began," she continued, "with one act of kindness. One night. One stranger." Her eyes flicked toward the glass facade where a massive portrait of Jacob Davidson hung, captured in his final years, his smile gentle and eyes hidden behind the dark glasses that had once seen so much. "You don't need wealth to change the world," she said, her voice warming, "just a heart that refuses to walk past." The murmurs quieted completely now. Even the wind seemed to hush. She told them about that frozen night, about the man who couldn't see, and the girl who couldn't afford to stop, but did anyway. About how a moment of compassion had rippled outward, changing 2 lives and hundreds more that followed. As she spoke, the crowd's expression softened. Some people wiped their eyes. Others clasped their hands tightly, as if the warmth of her words might seep into them. "Mr. Davidson taught me that blindness isn't just about sight," Nora said. "It's about forgetting to see others. Forgetting to care. But when we remember, even for a moment, miracles happen." Applause rose, quiet at first, then swelling like the tide. She paused, letting the sound wash over her, her gaze drifting upward toward the softly falling snow. Jacob had always loved the snow. "It's the world's way of starting over," he'd once said. And here she was, standing in the same kind of night they had first met, the same cold, the same silence, but this time she wasn't alone. When the applause finally faded, Nora closed her speech with a simple, steady voice. "Tonight, we dedicate this foundation not just to Jacob Davidson, the businessman or the philanthropist, but to every forgotten soul who ever stood in the cold, hoping someone would stop. Because I believe," she smiled, her eyes glistening, "that kindness still exists. And as long as it does, there's hope for us all." She stepped back. The crowd rose to their feet, applause breaking through the snow like sunlight through clouds. Cameras flashed. A choir of children, the same group who had once sung at Jacob's memorial, began a soft rendition of Amazing Grace. Nora bowed her head for a moment, her breath visible in the frigid air. Then she stepped down from the podium. The ceremony ended. Dignitaries shook her hand. Journalists crowded for quotes. But Nora's mind was elsewhere, drawn by something quieter. She slipped away from the crowd and out through the glass doors, into the snow. The city was hushed again, blanketed in white. The streets shimmered under the soft golden glow of street lamps. Her footsteps crunched gently as she walked along the same road she had once biked, the same place where her journey with Jacob had begun. It felt like a dream, or maybe a memory replaying itself. The world seemed softer now, slower. The air carried the faint smell of chimney smoke, the same scent that had filled the night when she met him. And then she saw her. An elderly woman stood at the crosswalk, her thin frame trembling under a wool shawl. She held a small shopping bag in one hand, a cane in the other. The lights changed, cars rushed past, and no one stopped. The woman turned her head toward the sound of footsteps, toward Nora. "Excuse me," she said, her voice frail. "Could you help me cross?" Nora's heart caught in her throat. It was as if the universe had opened the same door again, giving her the chance to finish the story where it began. She smiled gently and walked up beside the woman. "Of course," she said softly. "Hold on to my arm." The woman's hand was cold, fragile as paper, but her grip was steady. Together, they stepped into the crosswalk. Snow fell around them like confetti from heaven, each flake glowing gold under the streetlights. Halfway across, Nora looked up, and for the briefest moment, she could almost see him. Jacob. Standing on the other side of the street, his cane in one hand, his familiar smile framed by the glow of light and snow. Her breath hitched. The vision faded, but the warmth lingered. When they reached the curb, the old woman patted Nora's hand. "You're an angel, dear," she said. Nora laughed softly. "No," she whispered, "I just learned from one." The woman smiled, confused but grateful, and shuffled away into the night. Nora stood there for a long while, watching the snow fall. Cars passed, lights flickered, the city hummed, alive again. And for the first time since Jacob's passing, she felt truly at peace. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out the worn letter, the one he had left her, folded so many times the creases had begun to fade. She read a single line silently under her breath. "Be that light for others. Always." She looked up at the sky, the snow catching in her lashes. "I'm trying," she said quietly. "I really am." Then she tucked the letter back into her pocket, smiled, and began walking toward the foundation building, its glass windows glowing warm and gold behind her. Inside, the lights from the lobby spilled out across the snow, and for anyone watching from afar, Nora looked almost luminous, a figure outlined in gold and white, framed by the soft hum of the falling night. In that moment, she wasn't just a girl who once helped a blind man. She was the keeper of a legacy, a living echo of compassion that would ripple long after her footsteps disappeared into the snow. The wind swept softly through the streets, carrying the faint laughter of children from the nearby shelter, a sound that seemed to blend with the whisper of Jacob's voice. "Through your heart, I finally see." She thought she was saving an old man from the cold, but in truth, she had saved the world from forgetting how to care. The camera of the mind pulls back, snow swirling through city lights, the foundation's glass building gleaming like a beacon in the dark. And there, at the heart of it all, walks Nora Murphy, red coat bright against the white, the girl who stopped when no one else did. The girl who turned a single act of kindness into a light that would never fade. She thought she was saving an old man from the cold, but in truth, she was being led toward her destiny. Because sometimes, one act of kindness can rewrite an entire life. If this story touched your heart, don't just scroll past. Subscribe for more life-changing stories of hope, compassion, and second chances. Tell us in the comments, would you have stopped for him that night? Remember, kindness is the one investment that never loses value.